Good morning from the low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the Beast and Family podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined in a few minutes by Rob Donaldson, who does such amazing work over at the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. He's amazing at taking a look at this great game of college basketball all 12 months out of the year. We're going to be chatting with him about something that I always have a little bit of difficulty, which is why I'm airing it out on the podcast, being able to evaluate some of these freshmen for the upcoming season, knowing what you're going to be able to get in terms of some of these guys that we haven't really seen at the college level. When it comes to these junior college transfers, we're also going to be talking about how some of these mid-major teams have really benefited in terms of their recruitment, in terms of bringing in freshmen with all the transfers that are going up to the power conference level. So we're going to be having a great chat there. We're also going to be talking about a few teams with him that he's a little bit bullish/bearish on as well. So we've got a great chat coming up today with Rob, as he always delivers the goods. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, naming does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you are able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to have access to their funds whenever they want. When you go to edgeboost.bet, make sure you put in that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That's going to give you a dollar-for-dollar match on your first deposit up to $25. And additionally, you do get cashback rewards when you do utilize EdgeBoost. So they do an amazing job of getting you squared away, and Rob is doing a great job of getting us set for the upcoming college basketball season. Just an absolute wealth of knowledge who you're able to follow on Twitter/X at RobDFB altogether. Rob, my friend, you do such a great job being able to gauge this great game, and I always do appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Greg. And like I say, every single time you have me on here, you know, I'm happy to talk about college basketball. And the more we talk about it and the deeper we go into the calendar year, it's becoming more and more real, my friend. We are starting to actually see some events on the horizon as we kind of we talk today.
And I just had my good friend Rocco Miller on the podcast yesterday, and he does a lot with regards to scheduling. Do you make anything about how a team schedules in the offseason, or is it for you a big giant nothing burger?
It's pretty much a nothing burger because I think when you look at the big names in that first sort of calendar month of the season, you know, yeah, some of those teams might end up playing better on the back end of the season, but everybody's sort of figuring it out in their own little way. And some teams are going to be ahead of others. Some teams are going to be, you know, jumping on the opportunity of taking advantage of teams that might be better than them, but just might be nervous to an extent. And so I feel like it's almost a little bit of that kind of quote unquote crapshoot through the first month. And for that reason, I don't get overly obsessed with kind of what games are on the horizon in that first month.
Yeah, and I do think that's really interesting because there are some teams that they want to challenge themselves, try to be able to build themselves up for an NCAA tournament, but still, with a lot of these teams, you have to go out there and win those games as well. There are some teams with unrealistic expectations to the positive and the negative. So I always think that that's interesting to take a look at, and it's always interesting to take a look at the freshman classes that we have coming in, because there's no Cooper Flagg this season. I feel like Cooper Flagg is pretty much a once-in-a-lifetime guy, just absolutely tremendous. So I will say BYU and all the guys that they've got coming in, man, those guys are going to be really good for this upcoming season. But how do you take a look at this year's recruiting class and just how to be able to decipher what these guys will not do in their freshman seasons?
Well, you know, it's really interesting now that we're kind of in this NIL transfer portal era, because I really do feel like the teams that we saw compete at the highest levels in the postseason last year were the teams that had the most veterans, and that was reflected in the number of starters that actually, you know, were freshmen in the Elite Eight, which the answer to that question was 2 players. You had Cooper Flagg, you had Jace Richardson. Out of the 40 starters who started in that Elite Eight, we're talking about 5% of the field were made up of that freshman class, despite it being, you know, a notably pretty good one. And also, when you kind of extrapolate that, you know, past, you know, going over 10 years, a decade ago, that number was actually 20% of the lineups featured as starting freshmen. And I think when you look at it from that perspective, you can very clearly see that the roster building aspect in college basketball has clearly changed. And I think when you're talking about the teams that are going to compete the most prominently at that level, it's going to be comprised of mostly veterans. And I think actually the freshman class that ends up making the most impact comes at the mid-major and low-major kind of level, where you have teams that are really giving these guys playing time and an opportunity to excel.
And how much do you think that recruiting has changed in this day and age? Because certainly these mid-major teams are not getting like the top 25 guys or anything like that. But I've noticed more of these like top 150, top 200 guys, they're going a little bit more to the Atlantic 10. These top 300 guys, they're willing to go down a level. And I think that that's been a little bit of a flipperoonie from what we've seen in the past in college basketball.
Yeah, and I think what's kind of speaking to is there's a lot of avenues to, elevate yourself to the next level. You can go the G League route. You can get paid at one of these sort of high major schools, or you can go ahead and get a lot of starting playing time and also get paid at maybe a mid major that isn't really competing on quote unquote like a national scale. I think of like St. Joseph's, who turned out, multiple pros this past season on their roster, but they got playing time. And a guy like a Xavier Brown, who was a very young, inexperienced player who would have never started on a team, say like a Duke or an Auburn over the past couple seasons, all of a sudden now he is getting paid by one of those prominent SEC institutions in Oklahoma. He's accomplishing his goals. He's getting playing time. He's building up accolades. He's racking in the NIL. And I feel like that's sort of the pocket that we're going to start seeing expanded when we're talking about those top 300 recruits. I think a lot of them are going to start to say, hey, I realize I can chase a bag here, but I can chase opportunity and ability to elevate my stock through playing time at just taking maybe another level down. I think that's a really good thing for college basketball.
I think so as well, and I do think that it's going to be very encouraging to see what we do get out of these guys that have decided, you know what, we're going to be going down a level, but I'm going to be chasing playing time instead, because how much is it now that these guys are sort of motivated by the fact that they can make some money if they go out there, they ball out, they have themselves a big season, and I think that that's just a new wrinkle in what we've seen in college basketball.
Yeah, and especially when you're talking about, the NBA draft equation, right, where it's not just the 30 best or the 60 best players in college basketball specifically that are going to be going out to the NBA draft the next season, right? You have, players from overseas. You have players that went the G League route. You're going to have players that kind of requalify in some weird way who never played in college basketball competing with those talents that went the college basketball route. And so if you're maybe the 30th best guy in your class, obviously you are a very good player, but maybe you say, hey, I can actually carve out a career within the sport of college basketball for 5 seasons and rack up, and heck, if you play well enough, you can be a millionaire at that point, and that time's over. So I feel like the element of building up yourself within the college ranks, building almost like a semi-career out of the college ranks, is something that we're going to start seeing a lot more now, and I really do love it. I don't think it's maybe going to foster continuity within the programs, because guys are going to be bouncing like free agents every offseason, but I do like that at least the talent is staying within the sport of college basketball.
It certainly is. We saw so many guys like Taj Pettiford, for example, decide that he was going to be going back to college basketball instead of likely becoming a first-round draft pick. So I do think that that is very good for the sport, and I think that that's something to watch moving forward. As Rob Donaldson, who does great work with the show/podcast Rob's Best Bets, he's joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, and certainly when it comes to taking a look at the class of 2025, you did still see a lot of guys go to your notable schools like Kansas. They're getting in there a really good guy in Darren Peterson, A.J. DeBanza, who I was talking about over at BYU. He's rock solid, but how do we take a look at a school like St. Mary's that was able to land a top 100 guy in like a Dylan Shaw, and how do we take a look at some of these other teams that it does feel like they were really interesting, with a team like, I believe, Louisiana out there in the Sun Belt was able to bring in some good guys as well.
Yeah, and that just kind of speaks to what we were just talking about, where if those guys went to Duke, maybe they rack up 15, 20 minutes of playing time per game if they can really showcase themselves in the early going. Or they can go to these schools like a St. Mary's, which is still a constant tournament presence, and a team like Louisiana that has a lot of storied sort of program success, and immediately just play 30 minutes per game in a quote unquote weaker league where they're still going to be seeing high major opportunities to go up against those types of teams and build up their stock. And again, I think that's the approach that's going to really pay dividends. Maybe not just joining the crowd where every single talented player wants to go, but maybe paving your own road, getting the playing time, elevating your stock, and again, just kind of cultivating a career within this 5-year window of college basketball.
Yeah, it is a lot of fun to be taking a look at it. Man, there are some of these teams that I think are going to be getting a lot better this upcoming season because they have done a good job of being able to find some really good talent out there in the freshman ranks, because I do feel like it's now being a little bit underutilized because now a lot of teams, they want to be getting older. They want to be bringing in these guys with a little bit of experience. And I do think that it opens up just a new opportunity in general for these freshmen. And how is it that we try to be able to decipher what these guys might be able to do their freshman year? Because that's one thing that I always have a little bit of a tough time with. Oftentimes you have to watch like random YouTube videos and what have you to be able to decide, all right, what is this guy going to be able to do? And I think that that's just really the difficult question. And I think that it becomes, do you trust in these recruiting experts or not? Because they certainly have their hits and misses.
Yeah, and that's where I don't want to sound like arrogant or condescending, but it's just like, okay, this guy's a 5-star. Okay, this guy's a 4-star, but he's rated higher than a different 4-star. How much stock should I put into that? I don't really think I should put any stock into that, to be honest, because there are hits and misses. And what we're going to learn through just kind of the process of watching these games, which I get it, we want to be able to predict exactly what's going to happen with every roster and with every impactful player, what they're going to bring to the equation. And sometimes we can have a good feel based on just off-season conversation, maybe those secret scrimmages, maybe a coach saying, hey, yeah, this guy is lighting it up in practice. He's hitting a bunch of threes. Maybe that team needed sort of that 3-point jump shot specialist. I can think of a million teams just off the top of my head who kind of lived and died by, not being able to hit a 3 when they needed it last season. And all of a sudden, if they have a guy in the equation who specializes in that role and is maybe willing to kind of grow into a bigger player after year one, I feel like those are usually the most impactful freshmen. And it's just a matter of kind of identifying who those guys are actually going to be once we have some reps under their belt.
Yep, no question about it. And I do think that it's going to be a lot of intrigue to see what we get out there. And with mid-major teams coming into the start of the season, I feel like they can sometimes be some of the most volatile as well. So this is something I want to talk about with Rob, trying to be able to gauge some of these teams coming into the upcoming season, gauging some of these down transfers, these up transfers, and additionally just get the thoughts of Rob in terms of a few teams that he's bullish/bearish on. That's up next right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the VC Family Podcast. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VC Family Podcast, and it is always great to be able to get Rob Donaldson aboard. He does great work with the show/podcast Rob's Best Bets, and you're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at RobDFB. Just a wealth of information when it comes to college basketball. And Rob, we left off talking about some of these mid-major teams and how there could be a little bit of volatility with regards to these mid-major teams, because with these power conference teams, we know sort of what they're going to be getting. Although there are some guys that they average like 20 points per game at the lower level, they go up to the higher level and they're just not the same guy, and then they do have to go from being like guy number 1 to guy number 3, guy number 4. I do think that with the unknown of these mid-major teams, it does make it both a little bit more rewarding if you hit, but also a little bit more volatile if you miss on some of these teams as well, though.
Oh, 100%. There are going to be some teams in the mid-majors that you and I really gravitate towards, and like these are our darlings. And all of a sudden, it's midway through the season and they're sitting a game below 500, or maybe are just kind of completely out of mix of their conference, and we're like, man, how did I get this wrong? This felt so right. It happens every single year, but to your point, I still feel like that's kind of where the money is made in the pocket of college basketball. Sure, you can bet on the Arizona Duke game or the Kentucky, Arkansas game, and you can have a lot of fun betting on those angles, and you can feel like you love those angles, but those angles are inflated. Those angles are sharp to the nail, and it's just a matter of kind of, I don't know, almost guesswork sometimes of picking the right side of the spread. Flip of the coin is basically the odds you're getting on any given line in those sorts of games. But when you do have like a Winthrop versus High Point, a major conference game, I feel like those are the games that you can actually find some definitive value in. And that's why I really love to live in that pocket as a bettor.
Yep, it certainly is a lot of fun to be able to take a look at these teams and just to be able to decipher what we might be getting out of them in general. As Rob Donaldson, who does such such great work over at the Rob's Best Bet Show, is joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And what else makes these teams so interesting is just how to be able to take a look at the opposite, because we know that a lot of these mid-major teams, they lose a lot of talent and they have to replace that talent. That typically means that these guys that we're seeing 0 minutes at the power conference level, they were top 150, top 200 guys, they just weren't able to pan out. They have to go down a level. And I think that that's a different ball of wax as well. I think that that's another adventure to where if you hit, you are able to really decipher and you're really able to find a lot of value on these teams. And if it misses, man, that can sometimes be a little bit brutal too.
Yeah, and it's not like you're getting like the Janai Broom going down to, Fordham or something like that. It's always somebody who got kind of almost minimal playing time as a down transfer going down to the mid-major level. And you can say, you know what, he was at least recruited to go play at a high major. He didn't get a lot of playing time, maybe didn't get a lot of shine, but maybe he turns into something with that kind of that heightened opportunity. And that's kind of what we were talking about with freshmen, just that opportunity that these players maybe didn't have at that bigger school. And to your point, sometimes it's like, oh yeah, this is really going to pay off. And other times it's like, wow, there's a reason why this guy wasn't getting a lot of playing time at that high major that he transferred from. So it can be really hit or miss, but I do really like the down transfer aspect, to these programs and to this transfer portal cycle, rather than maybe like the high upside up transfer from a mid-major to a high major a lot of the times.
Yep, and I do think that that's a lot of fun, and I do think that we're taking a look at what we're going to be getting in college basketball with some of these guys. It is going to be really interesting to take a look at them. And is there a team in particular that you take a look at? They've taken some swings here in the transfer portal on some of these guys that maybe didn't pan out at the power conference level, and you just feel bullish about them, because I take a look at a school like High Point, and I think that they've done a really good job of being able to bring in some transfers via the portal. Some of these guys were at the higher level. Some of these guys are mid-major guys. I think that they've really been able to do it right, and I do think that there's a chance that could pan out for them. And I want to get your thoughts on a few other teams that maybe you like the, for lack of a better term, chances and swings that they've taken here in the offseason.
I really do like High Point, and it's tough to really like a team after they were so great last year and how they were so deep last year. And yeah, they took a lot of losses in the portal, and including, I guess, their head coach, if you want to even take it that far, with Alan Huss. But I still feel like this is a intact roster with a really good building point after the last couple of seasons. And also, when you're looking at Winthrop in that same Big South, really do look at Winthrop and think, hey, this is a really fun team, a really energetic team that retained a lot of the talent that they had last season during their championship run to at least make the finals in that conference tournament. And another team in the mid-major basketball rankings that I think had a great season last year and could really build on it is George Mason. I really loved what Tony Skinn was able to do last season. And, obviously they came up just short against VCU in a game where they theoretically could have knocked off Ryan Odom's bunch. I feel like when you look at their roster and look at the veteran-heavy presence, we were just talking about it. I think you need veterans to really compete at the highest level in this sport right now. And my goodness, they are 9 deep with veterans. And I feel like during this little one-time window, they might be the team out of the A10, especially with a lot of roster turnover.
Yep, absolutely. And that Atlantic 10 in general, I do think is one that is so interesting to be able to dive in on, because I take a look at George Mason as being a team that I really like. George Washington is another team that they've been able to build a little bit of depth. They lost one of their top players in Garrett Johnson prior to the start of the season last year, and that's a team that I feel really bullish on as well, both Georges.
I do like both Georges. They're real talented, and I think that when you look at the A10 and you see a guy like a Ryan Odom kind of bounce, and VCU, this is the first time in a while that I think when you look at VCU, they haven't really had their guy at head coach, because they had Mike Rhodes and immediately transitioned into Ryan Odom. I mean, you're not really losing sleep at night if you're a VCU fan. Now there actually is like a hint of a little bit of maybe, who knows? It could be the same old VCU. Obviously, they got the Siegel Center on their back, and I think a lot of talent is still pouring into that team. But at the same time, it feels less definitive. And last season, we saw Dayton even kind of take a step back under Anthony Grant for the first time in a while as well. And the A10, still a Premier League in terms of bringing in talent to the conference. They're not like one of these, like the Sun Belt or the OVC, for example, that kind of hemorrhage more talent than what they bring in theoretically. They're a talent that they're a league rather that accrues talent from come down transfers and up transfers. And I feel like when you're talking about it from that standpoint, it really opens the door to a lot of these teams in the A10.
It really does. And with that Atlantic 10 in general, I think that I'm very bullish on that conference. And then I look at another conference that we consider to be one of the high mid-majors in the American, and I just feel a little bit bearish about them because it feels like Memphis is going to have a little bit of a down year. And when it's all said and done, I don't know if I'm crazy, but I was talking about teams with some upside that maybe brought in some guys from the power conference level. And I take a look at a team like South Florida, and they're really a team that intrigues me.
Yeah, and obviously last season, under those circumstances, it's almost like one of those years where you don't want to say it's a throwaway year or a year where they were up against it. They could have never won, but it was just kind of one of those weird sort of scenarios that plays out that it's a tragedy, and you don't really know how that affects the morale of the players, just the team's energy in general heading into the season. And I feel like when you look at that roster, I think it's extremely talented. I also look at a roster like Wichita State under Paul Mills. I get it. People are wanting Wichita State to be what they were immediately from the Missouri Valley Conference, and they hadn't really been that over the last couple 10 years here. And Paul Mills did not start off the hottest in terms of that initial impression, but the way that they were playing basketball at the back end of the season last year did give me a little bit of confidence to say, hey, something could be brewing here in year 3 for Paul Mills. And for that reason, to your point, I feel like this is a little bit more open of a league without FAU being as dominant, without Tulane being as sort of prominent, with UAB losing a lot of talent, and with Memphis having, their issues as well. I feel like when you look at the middle of the American, there could be a team in there that all of a sudden just kind of rises to the top of this thing.
Yep, I do think so as well, and I think that it's going to be a lot of fun to see what we get in that conference, and we've got ourselves a lot to decipher in college basketball right now. I know you, Rob, are very hard at work to be able to look at what we might all be getting this upcoming college basketball season. You covered all 12 months out of the year, and in the meantime, you're doing a great job on the baseball front as well. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you, and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Well, hey, Greg, I always love hopping on and talk ball with you, and I can't wait until we're actually only a couple months really down the road, maybe 3 months down the road, until we're actually previewing specific games. But man, for those who want to follow my baseball bets as we lead up to the season, or my college basketball bets once we actually are in season, Twitter/X at RobDFB, and also on my YouTube channel, which is just my name, Rob Donaldson. But as always, Greg, I appreciate having me on, man.
And it is always great to be able to get Rob aboard. He does such an incredible job taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. And every single time he joins me, he lends such great insight. So a big thanks to Rob for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at GUnit_81. Keep in mind, Larry ZM, naming does not matter, so per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via the 5-star review. I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. We have to make sure that you guys are all squared away and that you guys are going to have an amazing upcoming college basketball season. So I appreciate you guys joining me today, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.